Hey there everybody, Smoothie here, back with our tutorial. So, in the previous episode we looked at adding the panel lines, which we have now done. I've actually spent time last night to redo them to the same as the 3 view we found in episode 1. As you can see, the lines more or less tally. So, what's next, you say? Well, for that we need to get looking at images. So, we run a Google image search for Hawker Tempest, and we start looking at the images. What I've noticed in the time that we've been away between episodes is that the inline engine, the Napier Sabre, and the radial engined, oh grief, engine type escapes me right now, but they have more or less common decals on them. But we'll just take a look at a couple of the images. Logically as well, if you do get stuck, you can use the Hawker Typhoon. They're the same family bloodline, same basic layout. The internal systems are more or less common. Where there's access panels on the Typhoon, there seems to be access panels on the Tempest. So we should be in a bit of luck with that. Another good thing, if you do have them, are model kits. Usually model kits have a good detail sheet or decal sheets. So I'm just going to do a search for them. Hawker Tempest decal sheet. See if it's got anything that people have used for good grief, models. Right, let's have a look here. As you can notice, there isn't that much decaling on the Hawker Tempest. It's more or less just the roundels, the pilot, maybe some nose art every now and then. AMW, my initials. Anyway, so we're going to look then at, since we can't find many decals, we're going to have a look at the weathering. You'll notice we've got an exhaust stain here. Now, the thing to remember about exhaust stains is that it's burnt dust. So you're going to want to add a new layer, okay, and select a tannish colour. For this I'm going for around, yeah, probably there, which would be a hex code of B3A284. So we'll select that. Next thing we want to do is enlarge our brush. So we do that by selecting your brush tool, going across the right hand side next to swatches and selecting brush, and setting its size to around probably 12 pixels ought to do it, with a hardness of 0. Great, so we've also added in a new layer for this weathering, and you can see that as you zoom in, you can see a very faint series of weathering on this aircraft. Now I've got a graphics tablet which I'll be using for this, but you can do it with a mouse as well. It's no great deal. And what we want to do is we want to add in patches, not solid lines but patches of it, kind of like so. Just drop some on. Okay, next colour you always see in exhaust is a brownish or a black. You can use pure black for this. I found it makes a nice trade-off. But this we want to add more or less every few, and then drop it in between and onto this previous layer we had. Kind of like so. Right, next thing we want to do is we want to hit that with a blur. So again, up to the top, filter, blur, Gaussian. And we increase the blur amount to somewhere around there, I'd say. If we look at that on our stand texture sheets, you're thinking, what the heck is going on? Well, all will be revealed. Again, we select our, on the left hand side here, we come down to this icon. It's just below the paint bucket, and we select smudge tool. I've got it on defaulting at size 13. So what we do now is we smudge it out a bit. I mean, you can do this by just pushing up and round and defining some more exhaust gas areas like so. And another thing I like to do is just go along the edge like this in sort of semicircular motions, like so. It catches up. Then once we get to the ends here, just streak it out. Doesn't matter how rough it looks at the moment or how sharp it looks. I mean, we're going to be dealing with that in a minute or two. Again, just feather the edge slightly using the smudge brush, just so it doesn't look too linear. Okay, so there we go. That's really heavy staining. So next thing we want to do is again create a new layer, and then right click on the new layer and hit create clipping mask. Okay, next thing we do after that is default our colours to black and white by pressing the D key, and we fill it entirely in white. You're thinking, what the heck's that going to do? Well, I'm going to show you. So we fill it in white, we get that. We then go up to filter, render clouds. Okay, and that gives us this. It sort of takes it away a bit. So if you put it onto lighten as the layer type, it's not going to play nicely, are you, bugger? Alright, we'll go on to multiply then. And you just have to go through the layers, seeing what works best for you. I mean, I usually take... I mean, that doesn't look too bad. That's on colour dodge, and then we go to merge down. And again, filter, blur, Gaussian, or Gaussian, however you want to pronounce that. Then blur it again, like so. And then just to darken the colours down, if you select black, create a new layer, right click, create a clipping mask, and fill it over, and then take the opacity down, kinda to around that level. That ought to do it. And then merge it down, and then we select this to an set this to an overlay. You get the typical-ish stain, and then we take its opacity down till we get exhaust stain we're more or less happy with. In this case, I'm kind of happy with that. I'll say it's just quick and dirty for the tutorial. But yeah, that's basically the exhaust staining. Decals, you use the text tool on the left hand side, which is the big T. You can't miss the darn thing. You can also, if you wanted to, just look at the time here, coming up on 8 minutes 12. Okay, so if you want to draw rivet lines, let's just hide this exhaust layer. Rivet lines are just basically the same principle as panel lines, in the sense that you draw paths. So let's draw one here, because I know the type in as panel line here. Again, draw your path, click start point, click the end point, control click off it. Select your pencil tool and go across the right hand side here and set spacing to about 400 to 450 and the hardness to 100, size 1 pixel. And we create a new layer, right click and stroke the path with the pencil, and there you go, a nice handy set of rivets. Years gone by, I used to just individually select rivets by just going along a line, clicking with the pencil tool like that, and it used to take forever. But then discovered the paths, and things started speeding up. So, let's say you wanted to make them rivets look 3D. How do we do that? Well, there's two methods. You can either double click the layer and go to bevel and emboss and have it style as an outer bevel. Take the size down to sort of there. Adjust the lighting, so we'll go for -61 here to make them look recessed, like so. We'll add a bit of soften to them as well. Maybe not. maybe not. Okay. So there we go, you've used the layer styles. Great. So now you can use this here, the fill area, that's below the opacity at the top. And you can more or less take the cores out to where you want them taken out from. And I'll give you a recessed look. Problem is, because we used a square, we've ended up with square looking recessed holes. So what we do is let's go back to before we had the thing. Right, just a top tip while I remember, because I've just used it. If you want to undo, you can undo one stage in Photoshop, and that's your standard Control Z. To keep going after that, you press Control Shift Z, is it? Yeah. No, Control Shift Z redoes. Control Alt Z takes you a step backward. And if you want more steps to undo, you go to Preferences on Edit. And then we come across to General. And then we go through, next one, next one. Right, let's see, next. There you go, I've set it for 51 history states. That allows me to undo 51 times. I've also set a scratch disk as my G disk. What that does is a scratch disk basically is where it saves the temporary files as you work. So I do it as have the G as a backup scratch disk, so that as I'm working, it's saving files to that, which are then undone or redone when you use the Control Alt and Z. It's sort of a state that you can revert to, but you can't open directly in Photoshop, I've noticed. So it's worth bearing in mind, just setting it up, getting your history states right, your cache levels right, your cache file size, etc. I've got Photoshop using as much RAM as I can on my computer. So yeah, that's more or less all there is to it. Also, another thing you want to do, select cursors here and make sure full size brush tip is shown. I'll show you what happens if you don't. We'll just select normal brush size and we'll get my brush. Okay, and you'll notice that as I draw here, the paint's outrunning my marker. It's flowing on the outside. So the way to combat this is to go to the Edit, Preferences, Cursors, and then full size brush tip. You'll notice that when I click and drag, paint stays constrained within that circle. Anyway, back to making this 3D. So we drew the rivets on using the path, and then a stroke with a pencil set at 450% spacing. So what we do now is we duplicate that layer by right clicking on it and hitting duplicate. Next thing we do is we use the arrow keys to move it right and down to make it look recessed, or left and up to make it look well, as if it's protruding from the airframe. So we go right down, and then we create another new layer, but this time we right click on this new layer and then we create clipping mask. What that's done is that's constrained anything we put on layer 3 to the bounds of level 2. So if I put white on here now, you'll see it's constrained to them rivets. That's great. I'll show you what happens if you remove the clipping, release the clipping mask. It flood fills. Okay. So you create clipping mask. Once you've got it happy with your colours, you merge it down onto your rivets, and then you merge it down again onto your previous rivets, so all your rivets are on one layer. What you do then is you select filter and blur, Gaussian blur, or Gaussian blur, however you want to pronounce it, and you make sure your scale for the thing is right down. I usually use sort of this value, 0.4, that seems to give a good trade-off. And then we go to your standard overlay, and we take the opacity down. And there you can see we've got a rivet line. So, episode, what number is this now? 3. So episode 4, we'll be looking at adding more detail, adding more weathering, and that should be more or less the basics of the paint kit nailed. I'm in episode 5. I've got slated to be markings. So if you have been, everybody, thank you for watching, and I'll speak to you in the next video. Thanks.